Hi there, so welcome to this edition of the Joel Blake Business Show. My name is Joel Blake, I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about the Midland startup culture. In recent years, many businesses have been challenged by the pandemic, the global crisis, energy crisis, and everything else that they go through on a day-to-day basis. Yet, we are still revered as a great startup region. But how many startups actually become scale-ups, become the high-growth businesses that can truly contribute to the growth of the region? So today we're going to be exploring that and more with two exciting, wonderful, amazing guests and leaders who are at the heart of the business ecosystem here in the region. So first I'd like to introduce Daniel. Daniel Evans is the CEO of Beck. And we have Alonge, CEO of the Eco Group. Thank you, gents. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Startups, business, entrepreneurship. You know, we've all been in this area for a long period of time. But it's easy to say that we're a great region, right? In terms of this energy that we have for startups, the diversity that we have, the youth culture. But are startups really getting the support that they need? And Daniel, I'd like to just start with you because I know with Beck, you've been on this journey for such a long time in helping startups in the region. But do tell us a little bit about Beck, and then I'd like to get your views on, do you actually think startups are getting the support that they truly need?
I mean, where to start? It's such a big question, isn't it? So to give you just that little context on Beck, so we are an independent, not-for-profit social enterprise set up in early 2019 to support startups, moving on to then support, scaling businesses as well. So we've spent, a bit of time as one of the newer kids on the block, I guess, compared to a lot of the organisations in the city, but supporting those startups and early stage businesses. As you said, there's a lot of good things going on. There's a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of issues that really prevent those startups from progressing beyond there. And I think for us, it's been trying to unpick some of those challenges, trying to find ways to work with other organisations to provide the right support that's relevant for the challenges of building a business in 2023.
Fantastic. And we're going to get into some of those challenges because I think, we know you've been doing some great work in that area and really looking at some of those challenges head on. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is certainly making sure there's equal support, which brings me really nicely onto the Eco Group. Tell us a bit, Mac, about the Eco Group, what you do, and again, what do you think are some of those early kind of challenges that you're seeing?
Yes, essentially the Eco Group is a diversity and inclusion consultancy. We're data-driven at our heart. We set up in 2018, really to provide businesses with the tools and support that they need to go on that diversity and inclusion journey. One of the things that we noticed in the early days is that data was absent from most conversations around diversity and inclusion, and we felt that that was a starting point to ensure that A, organisations know where to aim their efforts, and B, to be able to measure success over a long term. I think that's really key to the conversation in terms of getting the right levels of support that businesses need. You really need to understand where that support needs to be directed, what kind of support, what level of support, and also being conscious of how that support changes over time. I think, as Daniel said, there's a lot that goes into the startup kind of narrative. As you scale, your challenges evolve as well. So you have to be switched on to what those challenges are at any given time in your journey. And I think even internally, from an Equal Group perspective, we've been on that journey from startup to scale up, and we're very much in that scale up dynamic now, and the support that we need now is completely different to the support we needed in the early days.
And I think that's a really great point because there's this evolutionary process for startups, and I think, with your work, Daniel, and what your team does in terms of really capturing those early ideas, but then also helping those existing businesses to get to the next level. And then the importance of data and information to make sure that journey is consistent and sustainable and managed I think is really important. I mean, just some early stats that we pulled up, Companies House and Honest Data is saying that there were just under 40,000 new businesses started in our region in 2022, which is up 7.9% since 2021. So, that's a good thing, right? Versus a dissolution of businesses at just over 27,000. So more businesses being started and being dissolved in the region. And Birmingham is the highest number of businesses in the region, with just over 18,000, compared to, I think, Coventry and Sandbar were the two regional areas that follow. But we still have this historic view that many businesses are not here 2 years, 3 years plus in the region. And I guess, Daniel, in terms of some of the work with Beck, what are the top 2 or 3 maybe challenges that you've seen in Beck, and what has your organisation been doing to try and support some of that?
I think for us, there's been a variety of things. I think the numbers, as you said, are positive, that there's a lot of startups that come through, but it's what happens next. Is, you know, one of us could jump onto Company's House, pay our £12 fee, register the company in you know, a couple of hours, and that will count towards those figures.
Yeah.
We haven't done anything, we've not traded, we've not made any money, but we're adding to that positive statistic. So really it's thinking, as you said, about what next in terms of where these businesses go and what they do. I think 2 big challenges for us that we've seen. Number one, and you know, everywhere will say this, is around finance and that access to that early stage finance. And I think the second one is from a skills perspective, but a skills perspective in terms of those people who really understand how to build and scale tech businesses. It's something that we perhaps are lacking a little bit in this region, is those people that they've been there, they've done it, they've built and scaled businesses all the way through to IPO or acquisition, and having them be able to input into the ecosystem.
So I saw you nodding there, Mac, in terms of tech business. Have you got any views on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I think that the knowledge point is key. I think, you know, as you said, anyone can kind of go on Company's House, set up a business, but how do you get your first contract? How do you make your first profit? How do you transition from being a one-person band to, you know, 10, 20, 50, 100 employees? I think that trajectory is something that we don't necessarily have embedded in terms of what does it take specifically in this region to do business, to continue to maintain a Midlands presence, to continue to exploit the opportunities. And there's a key word that keeps coming up time and time again, it's potential. And potential is essentially quite meaningless unless it's realised. And I think we need to really think about the infrastructure across the Midlands to make sure that we're helping people to realise that potential.
Why do you think there is some of those infrastructure challenges? I mean to both of you, but you know, Matt, just as you brought up the point, because you just flagged in my head that that's not a new thing. The infrastructure challenges seem to have been a long-term issue, but just
so there's a couple of different points. I think, firstly, we need to realise that the Midlands is somewhat behind places like London when it comes to this conversation around diversity and inclusion specifically, but building that ecosystem more generally. I think there's still some way to go to move for people from just talking about the issues to actually being brave and taking a step out and putting in place some of those resources that are needed. This is a very nuanced area, and you need to be really embedded and committed to challenging some of the status quo, and that status quo is around how business has been done traditionally, breaking things up, changing things. So when we talk about diverse supply chains, when we talk about positive action, these are things that organisations really need to be equipped to go on that journey. And you have to realise it's a long-term journey. This isn't stuff that changes just because you make a statement or you make a pledge. This is stuff that needs to be done continuously, and that's where we kind of fit in terms of data. I guess interestingly, from our perspective, obviously we are a B2B organisation. We support companies on that journey, but a lot of our work prior to the last 2 years had been in London, had been in Yorkshire, had been everywhere else apart from the Midlands. And it's only that recently we've started to get a little bit more traction in the Midlands, which kind of shows you where people are in that conversation.
That's very, very interesting. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there that resonates with me. I think the point at the end around not necessarily having the work in Birmingham coming back, that's something that we've experienced as well, actually, where you know, we've been doing some big projects for organisations outside the region. Almost, I think, and it'll come back to these structural issues where almost the same faces have delivered support for a very long time in the same way that hasn't really changed. The funding has allowed them just to keep going on and make sure, okay, tick the box because we've delivered our 12 hours of support. Okay, great. What does that actually do? How does that actually benefit the business? Delivered 12 hours, that program's been successful. It's new ideas, it's new ways of thinking, it's about new people and people that haven't had that opportunity to deliver the support. We've seen now these organisations coming through where actually they're able to do some fantastic stuff. The people with the money, the people with the pots and decision makers need to trust those organisations to do that.
That's a really, really valid point. And at the risk of being controversial, I guess, they'll sod it. At the end of the day, if you look at historically over the last 20 years, particularly in this region, it has been the same faces, it has been the same influences, not just holding the purse strings, but holding the policy and strategic and influencing purse strings, if you like, as a metaphor. And what you then tend to get is a sense of unconscious bias, or indeed formal conscious bias in the way that people work because of the level of control. But as you say, there was almost a new guard coming through now where the innovation, the ideas, the thought processes, the networks and the access is now forcing, dare I say, the old guard to think differently about their approaches. And I guess, you know, Mac, with your work in D&I exclusively, this merging of diversity, I guess with the youth as well, but the merge of diversity with business support, is it really working?
There's kind of a quick answer and a kind of longer answer. The quick answer is no, it's not working.
Okay.
The longer kind of more detailed explanation to that is that we really need to look at why it's not working. And I think, you know, you challenge it there in terms of the same old faces, same old conversations, same old decisions, and really you have to get under the kind of under the skin of it a little bit to understand that actually when we talk about data, for example, we're talking about both quantitative and qualitative. A lot of that qualitative data is informed by communities, informed by having conversations with people, really understanding what it is that they need, what it is that they're not currently getting, how they're not being served. And I think when you start to realise some of the hows, then you can be more equipped to implement things that are actually going to change. You know, it's not a case of ticking boxes and saying, right, we've done this, we've done that, we've done that. You actually need to look outside of that and kind of take a counterintuitive approach to say, what haven't we done? What haven't we tried? Who's not getting their voice heard? Who's not at the table when these decisions are being made? But fundamentally, to me, it comes down to leadership. And I think we need to really question, what does inclusive leadership look like? Who are those voices that are willing to stand up and not just recognise the issue, but actually do something about it? Those are two very different skill sets. I think, you know, I don't want to talk too heavily about politics, but looking at things politically, it's easy to stand up and say, yes, this is a problem and the data says X, Y, and Z. It's a lot harder to get embedded into communities and say, what do you want? You know, these are the challenges, this is the data that we've seen, this is the disparities that we're trying to solve. How should we go about that? And it kind of involves people giving up that power to a certain extent to say, actually, I'm going to use this opportunity to invite people that haven't traditionally had a voice into this conversation, understand what it is that they need, and then be committed to long term to change that.
So this is about inclusive leadership that drives support for all, rather than being a sense of this is how it is, conform or not. It's about having inclusive leadership that enables the conversation to get much more equal, much more diverse in terms of youth, gender, race, disability, all the different characteristics that we often talk about. Very interesting. I think the other challenge though is that it's a human nature to want to hold on to something that you've had for so long, right? And I would say that entrepreneurs are really breaking that mold, particularly in some of the newer sectors, as you say, like tech. You know, the green agenda is certainly a huge agenda at the moment as well from a sustainability point of view. Arguably, millennials are coming through with more social values, so therefore that's changing the way in which business is being looked at. And obviously ESG is a massive area. But I think one thing you mentioned earlier, Dan, which is always consistent, is access to finance, right? Because you can have the greatest idea, you can even get the support that you need to get started, even to get into the early growth phase. But once you want to really scale up, you need access to finance. And I would say traditionally, that's been an issue. Arguably, it might still be an issue in the future. But Mac, I know that you're involved in a lot of different initiatives around access to finance in particular, but is there any one that you're currently looking at or working on that you think helps to kind of look at what support is available in the region?
Yeah, so recently been doing a lot of work with Lloyds Bank. So I'm part of the Black Business Advisory Committee, essentially looking at black businesses, understanding what support they need. There's a wealth of support for startup organisations, and you know, Dan, you mentioned that typically that has been the focus from an infrastructure perspective. With Lloyds, we're looking at things slightly different, specifically for the region, so West Midlands, Birmingham centric, to say what is it that organisations need when they get to that £1 million revenue perspective. You know, that in itself is a challenge, and making sure that you're able and equipped to go from 1 million to 2 million to 10 million to 100 million, whatever that journey looks like. The challenges are a lot more complex, a lot more nuanced in terms of the interventions and support that you need as a business. So it's really about addressing that. Access to finance is absolutely one of the things that we're looking at. So understanding that there's a different financing requirement when you hit that £1 million revenue stage, making sure that organisations know what that could potentially look like. It's not necessarily going to be one route to finance. There's different options in terms of overdraft, in terms of loans, in terms of credit facilities, but just breaking that down for organisations to understand that the finance that they have access to meets the needs of kind of the problems that they're facing, challenges they're facing.
And I'll give kudos to Lloyds, and I will give kudos to some of the other banks as well. You know, we had NatWest in the previous show. They've got a great acceleration program. I know Barclays is doing a lot of great work as well. So it's great to see that large organisations are actually coming down to a grassroots level to really support that growth of entrepreneurs and startups in the region, which is brilliant to see. And I guess, Dan, in terms of though the wider entrepreneurship journey, in terms of not just, I guess, lending finance, but maybe, you know, investment finance, various different other levels of finance, what are you seeing for startups in the region at the moment?
I think the problem in this space is that those kind of early checks, those first few checks, we've got some good support at that kind of more scaling point where, you know, the likes of Midven and Mercia, also funds outside of the region who will invest here. If the business is right, they will invest here. Where if you're turning over six figures, you know, the conversation's there and they can get involved. I think the big challenge here, almost two parts. One is businesses' expectations around how they get that finance. We unfortunately see a lot of people who come and say, I've got a great idea, this is what I'm going to do, I just need somebody to write me a cheque for £200,000. It's like, it's not going to work, is it? You know, you need to have something in place. So really setting that expectation around what you need to do to get that finance. On the other hand, I think the real broken problem with our kind of finance within this region is within the angel space. Is we have, well, a lack of angels, but we don't have a lack of high net worth individuals. There's a lot of money in this region. You only need to drive through Little Aston or Edgbaston, somewhere like that, and see a lot of wealth. That wealth isn't necessarily coming out into the startup community. Maybe, again, a lack of education, that people would put money into property, put money into other things, but wouldn't necessarily think about that. We have one angel network, which I don't think is enough. You know, for a healthy, competitive market, you need more than one. I think sometimes it gets a little bit ignored because people think, oh, we have one, that's fine. You know, if you go to another city, it's common they'll have 3 or 4.
Agreed. No, sorry to cut you, but you know, I was just thinking about some work I've been doing down south again, out of the region, but exactly that. The ecosystem is such an integrated ecosystem because there's a lot of people all working towards the same purpose and agenda, whereas we're kind of scarce in the Midlands. But I think any business needs to get to a point where they are attractive to finance. And I think that's where we have a huge gap in our region, because a lot of that support, as you say, from a diverse perspective, a youth perspective, any perspective really, it's how do you get to that first inflection point, and often it is that 6-figure, you know, unless you're in the traditional sectors, I would say, you know, where people feel more comfortable, maybe manufacturing or engineering because of our history in the region. But that inflection point is really important.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, sorry, I think there's an interesting dynamic here in terms of the UK-wide narrative, and I think for a long time we've been very London-centric, so it's been, unless the startup is happening in London or unless there's a buzz around it in London, we kind of ignore it, and I think the region has to do more, and looking at kind of the infrastructure, looking at the central resources that we have to do more to do a better job of showcasing the talent that's in the region, the businesses that are in the region, and essentially build a platform for ourselves. And I don't think we've done enough from a PR perspective, if you want to put it in those terms, to say the Midlands is the place to do business. And I think from my perspective, it absolutely is, and it has a lot of potential, but we need to really look at what do we need in place to realise that potential.
I think as much as it might sound almost negative to a degree, I think what I've heard in our conversation is a lot of positive opportunities actually, because as you just said there, brand Midlands, you know, the Commonwealth Games recently put us again on a real global platform. And I know with Beck, you've been doing some stuff with Canada, for example, in terms of the work there. We've got the people. What we don't have is enough of an infrastructure to support those two things. We don't have enough support to promote that brand, and we don't have enough of the support for all people to then really release the potential, as you said earlier, Matt, that we all have. I think what really worries me, though, if I'll be honest, is that this is not a conversation that's not been had before. So what's really going to change? What's really going to move the dial? If there was a magic wand that we could all kind of cast right now, what do you think would really need to change to move the dial, notwithstanding all that we said? So, Daniel, what do you think? If you had this really wand or this genie,
get rid of it all. Do you know what? We're at the point where that opportunity is here. So obviously a lot of the business support and that sort of thing has been European funded for a long time. We've got this big shift now where we've come away from that. We've got UK Shared Prosperity, the UK replacement for that. For me, this was going to be a big opportunity to do something different, to try something new, to take risks, to do that. So far, that doesn't feel like that's been the case. I think there's a lot of worry and concern that we're just going to fund the same old stuff, but we've got less money, so actually we're going to under-resource what was average anyway. I've seen a few other regions where they've taken a lot more of a collaborative approach to saying, let's try new ideas, let's invite people around the table who haven't had this opportunity before. I don't see that happening here, and I think for me that would be the big thing, is giving that new ideas, a point that we've made several times, but I think a really good example for me is what Oyen and her team at the Neo Enterprise Group have done. You know, somebody that potentially wouldn't have had the opportunity to get funding before. They had funding through the Combined Authority to run boot camps. They've done some remarkable work now. That organisation's turning over 7 figures, which in the enterprise space is very difficult to do. It's difficult to get to that stage.
So this sense of inclusive collaboration with new ideas, new ways of thinking, bringing kind of the infrastructure together with that innovative thoughts and mind processes.
Yeah, building it right from the start. And you know, every time that we've approached a programme, I think our strength has really been everybody in the team, all the mentors involved are entrepreneurs. We come at this from the side of who we're trying to support. So really building back and thinking, right, well, if we're starting from a blank kind of canvas, what do we need to do to support these entrepreneurs? Where are they looking to go? What is that journey like, and how do we get them down on that journey? So really reinventing it from the ground up.
Fantastic. Mark?
Yeah, I think just to echo that, I think there's a need for collaboration. So a lot of the businesses in this ecosystem, West Midlands, are facing similar challenges, and I think there's an opportunity there to collaborate and ensure that there's a combined effort towards kind of the same direction. The other point I wanted to make is just about leadership. You know, we've spoken about leadership time and time again. I think there is a need for different approaches, and essentially leaders have to be a little bit brave. And some of the work that we do with leadership teams to make sure that they feel equipped to have those conversations, they feel equipped to do things a little bit differently, because I think that sometimes there's a little bit of a fear from leaders to say, if I step out, if I'm bold, if I'm brave, if I'm ambitious in this space, is it going to come back and kick me in the rear end? And I think just moving away from that fear and looking towards the opportunity to say, actually, there's a chance here that whatever we do that's different could be a real game changer, could set us on a different path, different trajectory. So it's really about having that confidence to step out and really understand what does inclusive leadership look like. We do a lot of programs in London, which is great, but also it's a shame. We need to harness some of that energy here, and the Midlands, I think, is the place that has the most potential in the UK to really set a new direction of travel for what does an inclusive business community really look like.
Just to add on the collaboration point, which is really key. So when we started early 2019, I remember sitting around a round table that was done about the tech community. I felt out of my depth because we're just getting started and all these people here. That was something that's came up, and it's come up time and time again. We don't collaborate enough. We don't collaborate enough in this region. A lot of people now think, oh no, we're working on that and we're doing that. But the collaboration that they'll stick each other's logos on their websites, or they'll say, oh, we've signed this MOU together. Look, we're collaborating, we're chatting, we're working together. It has to be meaningful. It has to be real action, because otherwise it's empty words.
And to that point, again, just looking at the data, looking at your supply chains, understanding where you're spending money, who you're spending money with, and more importantly, who you're not spending money with. And I think there's opportunities here. Once you've got that visibility, once you've got that awareness of who's in the region, who's operating, to then start to dissect that slightly and say, okay, who aren't we working with? What can we do to support businesses in certain sectors or certain regions?
It's amazing. Well, look, you've heard it here. The gents have really explained a lot today in terms of what can be done to help businesses in the region. I think some of the key things that are really coming out is this sense of collaboration, and well, what does it really mean? I think the old rhetoric of getting around the table and having a chat and bringing whoever you want in the room for the sake of it, I think those days are kind of dead. I think we need to really think about who you really want around the table, why you want why you want them around the table, and more importantly, what's going to be done once that table is closed. You know, sick or tired of all this conversation. What we really got to do to move the dial, and you know, the gents have absolutely highlighted the fact that collaboration needs a new definition, but it's driven by a sense of inclusive leadership, a sense of having different people at that decision-making table. So can we please do that? Start having different people around the table so that collectively we all learn, we all grow, we all educate each other, because it's not about any one individual, it is about the region, it is about the UK, it's about everything that we can all do, it's about the communities we're here to serve. And so inclusive leadership, collaboration. I want to say thank you for tuning in. I want to say thank you to Daniel, thank you to Matt, thanks for your giving up your time today and your expertise to really share with our audience what can be done to really make this region pop in the way that we can, and not just make it about potential, not just collaboration, but about growth and success for all. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you for tuning in. Coming up next is a fantastic episode where we're going to be talking to two experienced and established and exceptional business leaders in the region. Two guys who came together with a purpose, who became friends and have done so much for our region. You just have to tune in, all right? Do it now.